Hi, everyone. This is Martin Willis, the Antique Auction Forum. A fascinating guest, Robert K. Wittman. He is a retired FBI undercover special agent who founded the Art Crime Team. He's been responsible for recovering $225 million worth of stolen art, where he's posed undercover around the world. So I have Bob on the line now. How you doing, Bob?
I'm great, Martin. It's great to be here.
There's a lot of intrigue when it comes to art theft. And I watched a couple of clips. We can talk about that later. You were on the Colbert Report, which was that was pretty interesting.
He's a great guy, very, very, very smart man.
Yes.
He works really hard on that show, and it's a great show.
And I got to say, he was kind of easy on you. I've seen him with a few other people.
I think he was actually interested in the subject because after it was over, usually they told me he's very quick to get up and go. I mean, he doesn't hang around at all. And in this situation, he actually, when we were finished with the taping, he actually had some more questions and wanted to talk to me about it.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Wow.
Wow.
I think he was actually interested in the subject himself. But it's fun. I mean, when you first go on and you're sitting in the green room, he comes in to visit with you, and that show gets taped between somewhere around 6:30 and 8:30 in the evening. It's about a 2-hour taping, and then they bust it all down to 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And he comes in and he says, listen, just first off, he says, I just want you to know that this is all, it's all good fun, and please don't take offense at anything, And then the producers tell you, and then when he leaves, they tell you, make sure you just let him do the jokes. So it's really
no one-upping, yeah.
No one-upping, right? You don't want to get on TV and try to, match minds with Stephen Colbert.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, I want to say most people's opinions are that art thieves are people like Pierce Brosnan, Cary Grant, and there's sort of like a romantic intrigue when it goes to art thieves. What are art thieves really like?
Well, I call those the Oscar-winning art thieves. They have. You're right. They have that opinion that they're handsome and debonair and rich and that they just do this because they dabble in the arts. But the truth is, generally speaking, there's three types of people who are involved in art theft. And that's different from the people who are involved in, say, frauds, forgeries, and fakes. It's a whole different type of concept. But the people who are involved in theft are either general criminals. They're involved in many different types of criminal enterprises, including armed robberies, car theft, and everything like that as well. And they just happen to do an art heist. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then you have what I call the experts, who are people who have access to the collections, and who go in and study collections, and then after a while either become, emotionally involved with this stuff and decide they're going to take it, or they have, outlets to sell it. And then you have, and they include dealers, and then you also have the people who actually work in the museums who are, insiders. And generally speaking, for museum theft, we find that about 88 to 90%, when I say we, the FBI statistic is between 88 and 90% of museum heists have some insider component.
Wow. And are a lot of when you say inside, this is the way you get these statistics, of course, is by cracking the case and
exactly, by solving cases, right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And what is the percentage of the cases that are solved and the art returned?
Well, I mean, it depends. The general percentage of returned stolen property is somewhere between 5 and 20%. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's for all stolen property. We're talking about cars, TVs, anything. 5 to 20%. But when we talk about art heists and these high-value paintings, it's probably 90 to 95%.
Wow.
Like every card. And the reason for that is because, as we know, and as your listeners probably would understand, art can't be chopped up like a car. It's not like drugs that can be cut up. It's not like a car that can be chopped and sold for parts. The art is unique within itself, and if anything happens to that art, the value goes down. So, therefore, anyone who takes a piece has to keep it in good condition and has to sell it, and then when it comes back to markets, when we get it back.
Now, has anyone, in your opinion, ever stolen art just to admire it?
Well, I've known individuals who have stolen property, and it's not always art. Let me explain one thing about that. When we talk about art theft, we're not just talking about paintings and sculptures. Under the FBI, definitions of the art theft and art crime team, it's cultural property theft. It all comes together. So we're talking about pre-Columbian looted artifacts, material coming from the Middle East, Asian artifacts, all those types of historical pieces, even, like I said, U.S. artifacts, from U.S. history. So, a Bill of Rights or a sword from the Civil War, all these things are considered parts of the art theft program. Okay? So, do people steal? I have seen people steal who, wanted to collect items, and they enjoy the items, and they take them for that reason. But ultimately, they also want to sell them.
Now, you just mentioned the Bill of Rights. I heard about that. That was returned a few years ago. Is that right?
It was the Bill of Rights was recovered in 2003.
And can you explain exactly what happened in that given situation?
Well, what happened there was in 1789 or 1787, one or the other, I sometimes get it confused, George Washington sent 13 copies, had 13 copies actually scribed and sent to the 13 states for ratification of the new Bill of Rights. And most of the states kept them. One or two returned them back to Washington, but most of the states, ratified them and kept them. One of the states that kept theirs was North Carolina. Well, it was in Raleigh in the State House all the way through up to 1865 during the Civil War.
That's right.
A Union trooper actually went to the State House. He was coming back north on a march with Sherman's troops after going through Atlanta. And as they went through North Carolina to Raleigh, they captured the capital and then went in. And this trooper took the Bill of Rights. He actually took it as a souvenir. And he went back to Indiana with it and sold it for $5. And it was kept in a family all the way up until 2003, when a couple of appraisers, antiques appraisers, actually found it, bought it from the family, and attempted to sell it for $4 million to the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia.
Wow. I bet you they were a little disappointed.
Well, it was, we identified, they had it identified as well. They had taken it and had it looked at by experts at the George Washington University down in Washington, D.C., and they had it looked at. It was the congressional, their think tank, or their historical, group that does those types of authentications. Anyway, they had it looked at, and they were told at the time that it was probably North Carolina's. So they ignored that and just kept going with it. Of course, it was stolen property and belonged to the government in the state of North Carolina. So we got arrest. Well, actually, we got the seizure warrants from North Carolina and did an undercover operation in Philadelphia, where I posed as a philanthropist to buy the piece for the Constitution Center. And when they delivered it, we stopped everybody, seized the piece, and were able to return it to the State House. Now,
where does the statute of limitations play in all this?
Well, the normal statute of limitations for stolen property is 5 years. So, if someone steals an object and takes it after 5 years, basically you can't charge that person with the theft, in a standard property crime. But that doesn't preclude, like federally. I mean, if someone steals a piece of property and they take it from, say, Philadelphia and take it to Atlantic City, they've crossed the state line. At that point, that re-ups the statute of limitations. So it's for another 5 years. Because what you've done is you've actually committed interstate transportation of stolen property.
So how does this play in where the state owns? You recovered this piece for the state after 150 years.
Well, that's because there's a statute of limitations on the prosecution of someone who has stolen property. That doesn't mean that you can still pass good title on the property.
I see.
You see, I mean, it's like anything else with an artwork. I mean, there's three things that determine, the value and the ability to sell an artwork. And that's the provenance, or the history of it. Of course, it's got to be right. The authenticity, again, that's important, and then having good title. So that's why I would really impress. That's the touchiest part, I think, nowadays, because there's so much litigation going on. So I would really impress on your listeners that, if they're going to buy artwork, make sure that they do a due diligence research on the title, so that they know that they can own it and then continue to own it.
Right. Now, where does all the Nazi stolen artworks, does that ever come to play in any of your investigations?
Since I retired from the FBI in 2008, I can get involved in those cases. At the time, with the Bureau, generally we didn't get involved in those cases because those are not criminal cases. Remember, when you're in law enforcement, when you're talking about the local police, state police, or the feds, these cases have got to be criminal cases. that they can look into. And, that means that the round peg's got to fit right into the round hole. You have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the elements of the specific crime.
I see.
And in those situations, those aren't criminal cases anymore. Those are civil, civil fights.
Wow.
So generally speaking, the government does not get involved in those. It's between private parties.
I see.
So today, with Robert Wittman Incorporated, my company that I have, I can get involved in those cases and do the research and due diligence.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about your company a little later on. What is the number one? I don't know how to word this any different, but what's the number one stupidest thing you ever saw a crook do?
Well, stupid is one thing. I think one of the number one worst things I ever saw people do was about 20 years ago. There was a case in Philadelphia. 3 individuals went to the Pennsbury Manor, which is a historical site. It was the summer home of William Penn, the founder of the Pennsylvania colony, and he lived there from 1683 to 1700. Wonderful home. It's been preserved. A lot of his material is still there. Well, these 3 went in and decided they were going to steal antiques from the house in order to sell them at an auction. Well, that's stupid to begin with because you can't. It's identified material. You and I both know you can't sell it. But what they did was they got scared after there was so much press about the burglary, and it was on the front pages of the newspapers all in the area, that they took the material and they threw it into the Delaware River. Oh. Okay, in order to hide it and get rid of it.
Oh,
and we're talking about, material 300 years old, owned by the family. And there were about 37 or 38 pieces that were taken. Of those pieces, we recovered 32 at the bottom of the river. But we lost all the wooden pieces. And can you imagine, Martin, these pieces had survived 3 centuries, and they ended up, going into the river and going away because of, as you say, the stupidity.
That's an atrocity. Now, I was doing a lot of work in a major artist estate, Walt Kuhn, his family in Cape Nettic, Maine. Years ago, a bunch of bikers stole about 30 of the clown paintings, which sell up to $1 million. And when they were being sought after, they stacked them in a pile and lit them on fire.
Oh, boy.
And it is an atrocity because these things are, when they're gone forever,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's
especially
terrible.
when if the artist has passed or whatever, and then they can't be replaced, they can't ever be done again. You're right. And this material was cultural property. I mean, this was the history of our country.
Yeah, I like that phrase, cultural property. It just that one phrase kind of encapsulates what exactly it is.
Yeah.
Because it's like history is gone,
Right. And these pieces belong to all of us, not just one museum or one historic home. They belong to everyone. And
that's right.
We all lose. There's something I really felt bad about that at the time, and I always feel bad when I see that happen because I kind of look at it this way, and you probably might feel the same way, is that, we're all here together. When I say we all, everyone who's alive today, okay? None of us are going to get out of this alive. Okay?
That's right, yeah.
In the end. So it's our time, and it's our responsibility to protect this material for our children and their grandchildren, And if we don't, our forefathers and whatnot have kept it for us. They've been successful. And when something like this happens, when we lose a piece like that, that's a failure for all of us.
Yes.
We all carry the blame for that because, the future generations will not be able to, enjoy, learn from, and, inherit this material that we lose.
That's right. And this is going to roll me right into the next part is I did a podcast number 31 with Ulrich Bosser about the Gardner heist and the Isabel Stewart Gardner house case. And that kind of exemplifies what we're talking about here, those empty frames that are hanging in there where the Rembrandt was and all those wonderful paintings that are gone. First of all, do you know Ulrich by chance?
Oh, sure. Yeah. He's a reporter from out of Washington, D.C. In fact, I think there was a whole chapter in his book about me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I read the book too, but it was quite a while ago. It's a great book. And has there been any breakthrough at all that you're aware of on that case?
At this point, I have not heard of anything new since I conducted an investigation from 2006 to 2008. I was undercover in Madrid, Paris, Marseille, and Miami, chasing the Rembrandt Storm Over the Sea of Galilee and the Vermeer concert from that collection.
Wow. Wow. When you say undercover, can you explain exactly what do you pose as a prominent art buyer or something? How does that work?
Well, for 20 years, from 1988 to 2008, I was undercover somewhere in the world, working as sometimes a prominent art buyer, sometimes an authenticator for the mob, or other times as a professor, looking at art, or sometimes it's just a buyer who had absolutely no knowledge, but it was an easy con mark. So it depended on what the situation was. But at that time, I was undercover as a art buyer who was, who had clients around the world who were interested in buying this specific kind of paintings. Mm-hmm. And so we got within, I think, a few weeks of almost recovering those two paintings.
Oh.
Unfortunately, it didn't work out.
Yeah.
And I document that in my book, Priceless.
Oh, yes. And by the way, I'm going to have a link to that book up right underneath this podcast. So anyone who's listening to this can go to my website, and you'll see under this podcast a link to bring you directly to that book. That came out in, 2010?
Yes, it was actually published by Random House on June 1st, 2010. It's a national bestseller, New York Times bestseller. And in it, I talk about maybe around 15 different cases I was involved with around the world, and talk about recoveries and the undercover operations that went into them.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you actually ever have, I know this is going to sound kind of corny, but do you ever have like a briefcase full of cash?
Have I ever had a briefcase full of cash?
Yeah.
Sure.
Wow. I mean,
yeah.
That's like the ultimate undercover right there. Is you have
one case I talk about in the book where we recovered a $35 million Rembrandt that was stolen at gunpoint from the Swedish National Museum in Stockholm. And after about a weeks worth of meetings, we negotiated a deal to buy the painting back for $250,000. And I had all in $100 bills in my briefcase.
Wow. Has your life been threatened while you've been cracking any of these cases?
Well, anytime you work in law enforcement and you're dealing with people who are in these cases armed robbers, and in that Swedish case, those individuals went into the museum with machine guns and basically stole 3 paintings at gunpoint. Wow. And that happened many times. Whenever you're dealing with those people, you always have to keep your wits about you and be ready for whatever comes along. I remember one occasion we had just recovered 2 Picassos that had been stolen from the Picasso family in Paris. And when we did the operation, these individuals were meeting with one of my, quote, buyers to sell the paintings, and then they were arrested by the French police. Well, the people who were involved weren't too happy about it and said they wanted to kill me. So we had a meeting in Miami, and in that particular case, I had a gun in each pocket.
Oh, my God. Wow. Now, when you say from Picasso's family, was that the case where it was his granddaughter?
Indeed, yes.
And was that stolen from her by gunpoint?
No, that was stolen out of her apartment. She was away. The individual, what he had done was he had actually gotten in a year earlier doing some work in the apartment, and he made a key.
Oh.
But he waited a year for her to not be there for a good time to go in, and he stole the 2 paintings.
Wow. So I was recently speaking to a curator at a museum which will remain unnamed, and he told me that his museum and a number of museums are not insured because they can't afford it. And they also spend their money instead on beefing up security, fire prevention, things like that. What's the scoop on that?
What's the scoop? I have no idea. I don't know.
Have you heard this before?
I think that that's possible. I think it's irresponsible. I think that having insurance is something that every any collector or any collection of material should be insured. And you don't have to insure the entire museum. You don't have to insure every piece of the museum. What you do is you have a basis. All right. I mean, maybe it's a $5 million policy, and that's not that expensive. Okay. I mean, you can get something like that. You get a $5 million policy or whatever it is, $1 million policy, but with the idea that not everything in your museum is going to be stolen or destroyed at the same time. Mm-hmm. So if someone comes in and steals, 2 paintings and they're worth whatever they are, at least you have that basis to work with to make that insurance company your partner in the investigation and try to recover it. So you don't have to have, $1 billion worth of insurance. You just need enough to make the insurance company your partner to recover the material.
I see. And they work with your new business that you have now, an insurance company will work with you on something like that. to recover.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do investigations for insurance companies. The latest one we did was just a couple of months ago. We were down in Houston. A woman was in her home, and there was a home invasion robbery where a man went in with a gun, basically stole a Renoir right off the wall. Didn't know what it was. He called it fat lady. Not knowing.
Jeez.
But he was doing a home invasion robbery, and we got a call right away from the insurance company, went down and conducted the investigation. At this point, we have not recovered it, but we're working on it.
Wow, that's great. And let's talk a little bit about your business. You're located in Pennsylvania, but you travel. Do you still travel worldwide?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we were in the last 2 years. We've been to Paris, Madrid, Barcelona, again, Genoa, Italy, working in London, Romania, chasing these paintings.
Is there any place in the world where more theft happens than other areas?
I think that it depends on the type of theft that you're talking about, and it depends on the material. I mean, of course, if you're talking about looted artifacts, those are coming from the source countries, and so that's the type of theft that occurs quite often. Then you're talking about paintings and that type of thing. There seems to be a lot of theft in Western Europe today, and the reason for that is because I think that the quality of security in a lot of the museums is a bit lacking. And it's not because they don't want it. It's because of the economic times and the fact that, it's very expensive. And usually what happens is, security is one of the first things that people start to cut. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because it's on the quote, the wrong side of the ledger sheet. It doesn't bring money in, supposedly. It costs money, So what a museum might do is, say we have 14 guards, and, maybe we can make do with 10. Well, what that does is it lowers your security profile, which makes you more apt to be a victim. And there's nothing more, something that just is so obvious. A few weeks ago, in Greece at the Olympia Museum, they had cut the security group to nothing. There was just one woman in the museum, so a couple of guys went in, they tied her up, and stole, I think, more than 40 items.
Wow!
Just at gunpoint because they could.
Yeah. Do more thefts occur in museums than in private situations?
I think it's probably more, I think the biggest amount of thefts are not from museums because museums do have a certain amount of security. The biggest amount of thefts are from burglaries of private homes, and a lot of that is not artwork. Okay, I mean it's not nearly what what we think it is. It's not artwork, but no, I think that private homes probably get the vast majority of thefts out there.
Now, in the business that you have now, do you also give people security ideas as far as protecting their valuables?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We do a collection security site facility management survey. And what we'll do is we'll go in, we'll look at the security, the layers of security, whether they have perimeter penetration, electronic, and then, human. And we'll make sure that things are done as far as best practices are concerned in all those types of situations. Also, we do collection management if individuals don't know what they have or want to know what they have. Or, people inherit things and they don't realize they get these collections and they don't know what's in them. We'll go in and do that. Also do object ID for them as far as identification is concerned and create databases. So, yeah, we do all that plus due diligence for provenance research as far as background material and we'll also do theft mitigation reports, which, if you want to sell something, you want to make sure it's not listed as stolen anywhere. We can do a report for you on that as well. So we're involved in many different parts. The only thing we don't do is appraisal.
That sounds like, I've done a lot of research on provenance and things, and that's intense research sometimes. Mm-hmm. So, of course, the higher profile piece, the easier it usually is. But when you get something that's still valuable, that's sort of obscure, sometimes you can't get too far as provenance goes.
Right. Well, what we try to do is this. I mean, I'll get somebody like you to do the ultimate background. Mm-hmm. But then what we'll do is we'll check all the sources that are supposedly where it came from. In other words, we'll ask all the tough questions. Did you really get this? We'll go pin it down. Mm-hmm. And what I mean is, it's not so much the provenance as far as where it was in 1860, but as much as today. If you bought it from this place, then we're going to go find that place, and we're going to take a picture of it, mm-hmm. and we'll look it up in the in the files of the city or the county or the state to see who was there and renting what, and get all the background reports. And then we'll go talk to everybody who was there. So it's actually an investigation, into where it came from and how far back we can go.
Mm-hmm. I was just at an auction 2 weeks ago, and there was a painting that a person bought at a thrift store in Florida for $3. I'm not exaggerating, and it just sold for $230,000.
Fabulous.
Yeah, and when you get a situation like that, and you kind of hit a brick wall, don't you? You know.
Well, my first thought would be, where did you get it? Where did the thrift store get it?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, where did they buy it from? Or where did they get it? Was it donated? Who donated? Do they have any records? Mm-hmm. And if they don't, well, I mean, you can only take it as far back as you can.
That's right. Yeah.
And what I would do then is I'd do a theft report, a theft mitigation report to see if it's listed as stolen anywhere. What's it doing in a thrift shop for $3?
Yeah, exactly. That does seem to happen where the family loses touch of what the values are of things. You know, that can happen.
Yeah, it could happen. But you know something, though, Martin, that's something that bothers me. And I'm going to say something about this because and you can use it or not use it, but here it is. You know, today's world, and we watch television, okay, and it's all these proliferation of television shows like American Pickers and Pawn Shop or Pawn Star, whatever it's called, or, you know, all these different shows. And the whole background, the whole idea of the show is to buy low and sell high. Mm-hmm. And it's all about how much money you could have made, you make off of somebody, you know? Yeah. And because, quote, you have more knowledge than they have. Mm-hmm. Well, what that does, I think it creates a feeling or, you know, an idea that this is okay to rip people off. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? In other words, yeah, it's great if you can go to a thrift shop and you have the knowledge to buy something for $3 and sell it for a lot of money. That's great. But when you walk into someone's home and you say, okay, I'm going to buy this from you for $10 because that's all it's worth, and you go out and sell it for $500, well, you know, you have an obligation, I think, ethically, to do it right. You know, there's no reason why you can't make a 20% or a 25% profit, but, you know, have it be a decent profit. You know, there's nothing wrong with bulls. There's nothing wrong with bears, but don't be a pig.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I'm definitely keeping this in because I agree with you 100%. And you know, of course, if you buy it innocently, you know, one of the biggest fines I ever had, I didn't know what I was buying, and you know, I bought it in a situation where it was an open market. It was an estate sale and open to everyone, and I had no idea what the thing is. I thought it was great, and you know, I was 18 years old, and made a lot of money. And in that case, I think it, you know, was innocent. But there are
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about these you know, these people like on these shows, you know, they're being aggrandized for ripping people off.
Yeah.
You know, and in the end, it's not, you know, a profit plus $600. You know, that's what it's all about. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, is wrong. I mean, I just think that's, you know, the wrong way of doing business, and I think that sends out the wrong message, you know?
Well, a little inside to that is American Pickers got a flood of letters, had to do with a cash register, I believe, that was bought for really a low amount of money and sold for pretty good, too much of a profit. And they got a flood of letters, so they had to change the format slightly of the show and show less profit.
Less profit.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's all treasure hunting. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's okay. I think treasure hunting's great. I think it's neat to do that. But there's another show coming out now called American Diggers, and what they show is this old time wrestler or something who goes out and digs stuff up out of the ground and then sells it for these huge profits or something. And again, I think that sends out the wrong message because I hope your listeners realize that it's illegal to do that, you know, on federal property, on battlefields, you know, in Indian burial sites. That's looting. Mm-hmm. It's not, you know, it's not legal. It's against the Archaeological Resource Preservation Act. These are federal crimes. So I think that a show that, you know, again, that aggrandizes that and says how great it is, you know, they really need to let people know that that's not, you know, it's not a good idea unless you know where you're going, you know, and what you're doing.
Now, I heard of a case, you just mentioned Indian burial ground. I just heard of something a while back that came up about this. Is that what you're alluding to, basically?
Well, there's many cases. I mean, I did a case in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and involving about $400,000 worth of material that was being offered for sale against the North American Graves Repatriation Act, which is basically protection of, you know, tribal material. And these individuals were selling this material for, this is sacred material came out of the kivas and the pueblos and whatnot, and we're selling it to collectors and dealers, and it's all illegal stuff. I mean, you can't sell that material. It's owned by the tribes, there's a lot of cases involving that material.
Wow. And I know in Mexico, for one thing, there's a lot of the shaft tomb, pre-Columbian burial figures that they're on the open market all over the place. But that doesn't seem to be illegal.
No, it is.
It is illegal.
Import it to the U.S.
But there's so many pieces here. It's amazing.
The pieces that are already here are illegal. But now that we have a treaty with Mexico, which does not allow the importation of those materials.
And a lot of those were dug up from farmers, and they would sell them from whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I would, and for your listeners who are into collections of antiquities, that's something that you really have to be aware of, because every year the United States signs new memorandums of understanding with different countries. I think there's 13 or 14 now that you cannot import material from those countries. So, you have to be careful with and know what you're doing before you get involved. I think they just signed another treaty in December with Greece involving ancient coins. So
really, wow.
Yeah. So
now, can you name a few other countries that this is already in place?
Sure. Thailand, I believe Thailand, Guatemala, Peru. They're looking at China and adding China to it. I don't think they've done that quite yet, but I think they're looking at it. Greece, Italy, all those countries.
Wow.
All those are source countries where this material is banned.
I would imagine Egypt.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful.
Right. Sliding back to what we were talking about earlier, the thieves. You know how you watch in the movies, they always have all this high-tech stuff, and somehow they have all the money to have all this high-tech stuff, to steal the diamond out of the museum and stuff like that. Have you ever seen a case where someone actually used any high-tech stuff?
There was one case a number of years ago in Vienna where an individual went into the State Museum and stole a golden statue called the Salt Cellar by Cellini. And that individual did have information about how to cut, or he was an alarm specialist, so he did have a way of silencing the alarms so that when he went in, he wasn't detected. But other than that, usually it's just an armed robbery or it's a shoplifting, I think one of the most high-tech pieces I've seen in recent years was an X-Acto knife that one map dealer was using to cut maps out of the rare book library at the Beinecke Library in Yale. So, usually it's pretty low-tech stuff.
Wow. I did an appraisal years ago. I think you'd find this interesting because I did an appraisal that the woman had a mansion in Pennsylvania that basically burned to the ground, and it was an early mansion. And in it, she had one of the well-known Gilbert Stuart paintings of George Washington. Mm-hmm. And she said, yes, we lost that. And I was in her basement doing an appraisal, and I saw this frame. I asked her what the frame was because it was an amazing frame, very large one. And she said, well, that's where the Gilbert Stuart was in. And I looked at it, and there was razor cut around the stretcher and smoke on the jagged edge of the canvas. And I said, you know what? Someone cut this painting out of the frame before the house burned down. Mm-hmm. And the woman started crying. I mean, she had no idea. I just can't imagine how that could happen. Have you ever heard of a situation like that?
No, but did they find it?
She's never. I was in touch with her a little while after this appraisal and asked, what she did about this. But as far as I know, I don't know anything's ever happened.
I would think that'd be pretty easy to find. I mean, if it's out there, I don't know how many years ago it was or whatever, but it should be reported so it can be added into the databases so that, if it does come up for auction, it does come up for sale, we can get a read on it,
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to speak about auction. Do you have a lot of situations where you've actually had to go to an auction of an upcoming article that was to be auctioned and confiscate it?
Yeah, well, with the Bureau, with the FBI, on a number of occasions, we stopped at auctions and recovered material. I could think of probably 3 different occasions where we did that, sure. Mm-hmm. That happens all the time in New York as well, with Christie's and Sotheby's, whenever there's these antiquities auctions and whatnot. When I say all the time, I don't mean all, maybe once or twice a year. where countries will make a claim on something. And then what happens is, once the claim is made, then the auction of that specific item might be held up, or done until it's been, identified and adjudicated. But the auction continues. It's just that one item comes off.
Yes, I had a situation where I had a really nice weather vane that was advertised everywhere, and the same thing happened. It was a stolen weather vane. I had no idea, and the person that owned it had no idea. He bought it at a large fair, antique fair.
Right. Did he get his money back?
I don't know how that ever panned out, but he spent some money on it too.
I would tell your listeners, if you're going to buy material that's, that has any kind of substantial value, you need to get good provenance and good history on it, and also make sure that the person you're buying it from is legitimate, and get their information, get their driver's license, get their name and numbers, because you never know, what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's good advice. Are there ever high-profile thefts that are just kept out of the news?
Well, I think that sometimes museums have this mistaken idea that they should not report. And I think that's an older idea. Back in the 70s and 80s and before, museums were loath to report missing items because they thought that would affect future donations to the museum and that type of thing, and it would be bad publicity. But I think today there's a whole sea change of ideas in that. And the fact is, if you don't report the theft, you can't get it back. Number one, so it goes away. Secondly, you're inviting the criminal to come back and do it again.
All right.
Okay, to get away with it. And thirdly, as far as due diligence is concerned, the people who are in charge of the museum or in charge of the historic house or whatever may have some liability issues because they're not withholding their duties and doing it correctly. So, there's a lot of different ways of thinking about it nowadays. And I think most of the times, most of these high profile pieces do get reported.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, do you yourself go into museums and look at pieces and think, well, this could be taken this way, this could be stolen that way?
No, I never think of how pieces can be stolen. I always think about how pieces can be better secured.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a different thought process. It's more of, I wish this had a better hanger system, or I wish these bolts this was bolted, to the wall, or maybe that piece shouldn't be so close to the door. But I always think about how they can strengthen security.
Mm-hmm. Well, they must train you through the FBI how to think like a criminal, or how a criminal thinks, I should say.
Well, you have to understand, when we talk about art theft and art crime, it's not about art history. It's about the art business. Mm-hmm. So, having a business background in the auction galleries or in the art world is very helpful. So it's all about how to make a deal in the art world.
Now, did you have any background with that at all?
Yeah, my parents were in the antiques business.
Oh, wow.
So I kind of grew up in it to a certain degree, and was actually working with my father. He had an Asian antique shop on Howard Street in Baltimore, which was the antique row of the city. So he always had a desire and always loved Asian antiques, and so he started a business up. And for a few years, I would go down and help him on Saturdays and whatnot. And you learn how to make a deal in the art world.
Mm-hmm. And that, by the way, I'm sure you're probably aware of this, but the Asian market is strong as can be right now, as far as Chinese goes.
Yeah, it's been booming, hasn't it?
It sure has. Yeah. One last, we're about out of time here, and I feel like I could talk to you all day. But you mentioned earlier that about somewhere around 10% of the items are not recovered or never resurface. What would you have to guess if you had to happens to those items?
I think they're destroyed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think we do lose pieces. I mean, I told you those pieces that were stolen from the Pennsbury Manor were destroyed. I think paintings sometimes, over years are not properly cared for, or when they're cut out of frames. I think sometimes it does a lot of damage, and sometimes they're not transported correctly. So I think that is our percentage of loss. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And now that doesn't mean to say that we're never going to get them back. It also means that sometimes they're just stored away and they haven't surfaced at this point. So sometimes it takes a whole generation, before they come back.
Yeah. When eBay first began, around 1997, 1998, somewhere around there, I bought a painting, and I was actually contacted by the FBI because the person that sold the painting, I guess, had sold some fraudulent paintings. Does the art crime team keep an eye on eBay and other online resale?
I don't think they keep an eye on it as much as they take complaints from it. In other words, if someone, I don't think it's a proactive situation where they're actually looking at it every day. What happens is, if someone makes a complaint off of it, yeah, they'll look at that and take that seriously. The biggest complaints that come into the Cybercrime Center are eBay fraud. So that's the biggest number of complaints. And it's not because there's anything wrong with eBay. It's just some of the material that goes on there is not correct.
This has been really fascinating.
All right. Listen, Martin, thanks so much for the opportunity to be on your show, and best of luck to you.
So this is Martin Willis with Bob Wittman. Boy, I'll try it again. This is Martin Willis with Bob Wittman of Wittman. No, I'm sorry.
So this is Martin Willis with Bob Wittman of Robert Wittman Incorporated.
I think I got to keep that in, and we're signing off. Thank you.